I'm counting always good afternoon with my lunch. If I don't eat lunch, I don't think that good afternoon come then. We had a lot of discussion within our country on the issue that to address an activity 1 and 2, especially. I think I wanted to have my paper here.
What is it? This?
Yes.
Sure. This is activity number 1.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. Activity number 1 and activity number 2. On the supply side and on the demand side. So we tried to put here some points, but I think as like this before lunchtime, no one is going to be press me to stop on a time and something. We discussed from the point of teachers. We put one new teacher training structure to be strengthened. Like what we mean here is we need to train more new teachers on a degree level, and then we observe it from this point one gap, and also all new teachers have component on inclusive education. They should have to learn at least in an introductory part in a school level. They should have to learn inclusive education system. The other is no systematic. Most of the time it's not work out, but there is a structure and a system in a different way, but most of the time it's not applicable. So the challenge, the system struggle with training needs of teachers in general. We say like the challenge that we are struggling with the training needs of the teachers in general. This maybe we are thinking the need of more teacher, and also we are thinking the need of existing teachers capacity building trainings, and also to some extent teachers by themselves who educated well in a special especially on a inclusive education system is deployed also. We say like we try to address these points and as a main point to present for the audience. But we now, as in our countries, we have a lot of things to do there. So this is from the maybe, yeah. And also we look from the structure, infrastructure point of view, lack of schools, poor buildings, poor school compounds. This all we discussed in detail. Like when we talk about full lack of a school, we discussed in a point of number of schools and a nearby and a neighbor. Most of the schools in our country, like you have to walk more than 1 hour to get to school. This is very difficult for children with disability to reach the school, and also children with disability comes from the poor community part. So even if there is available transport means, but the cost is very high. And most of the time also there is no available means for transport. Just to walk, your God gift is your foot to travel, to make your transportation. But they unluckily, they don't have their foot, legs. So they have no chance to go there. And also we look from the poor building parts. Most of the buildings, we say here poor building, because most of the time when we are talking about building, most of the time we are thinking about the ramps and like that. But here it's broad than the ramps only, because sometimes the building by itself have no walls, simply open, and sometimes in a different way we can explain this. It's not accessible for people in general also sometimes. So for children with disability, it's very hard because of poor buildings to to address their need in a school. Also for poor school compound. Most of the time, some scientists say it like the compound by itself teach the children. When they reach their school, they learn a lot of things from the environment in a school. But here in our country, the situation is very poor. Most of the schools, almost all, are like in a rainy season, it's mud. You cannot even walk. And also the environment and the compound is totally not accessible for children with physical disability, for blinds also, it's not accessible in general. So because of this, and also the other thing, like there is no means to teach like by pictures and something that from the green areas also, there is no green area inside on a school. They learn just what they don't have like opportunity for tomorrow as to become as a human being and to lead themselves. They learn like this. It's in a poor way because we send our children to be confident enough to learn from something and to upgrade themselves to lead their life tomorrow. But in a different way, our schools are existing. Only less than 10% have wash facilities. This is actually the data from National Wash Office. So they have data like in Ethiopia, less than 10% children at the school level have access for wash facilities. That means most of this, even this counted in only in the city areas. Most of children with disability come from rural areas, not in the city, because disability by itself is the cause. The main cause is the poorness. So the poor people living in abroad than the main cities. So they come from there. So this almost all we can say is not included children with disabilities in our country, because this shows that less than 10% is maybe the city schools that at least the learned people built by themselves and who have a capacity, at least for instance, 100 people come together and build their school for their children at the community level. Then that, and also most of the schools built by the like by potential supporters who donating supporting government from the building side of the school. So this is only depend on a donor. So we can say almost nothing in washing facility. Also guideline on accessibility. Well, actually we have like building codes and the other, but practically it's not working still. But we are trying still to push government to implement what we have in us in a code of the building, and also we have a different kinds of guidelines and policies, including the construction policy. Maybe my colleague will add later, and also most of children even have no access to learn preschools, means before grade 1. We tried experiencing like grade 1 to start point for our children. That is the case why we are not sending early age children to school, because they have to start the grade 1 like with age 9, 7, 10. So before that, they are just sitting at home. Some children who have access like to send a private school, a small schools we have a private. This also depend on a city level and a town level. They get a chance by paying for the private. Except this, the government not focusing on this, but there is still initiatives, but it's not going work out still, and it's not at the public side. From the point of learning materials, there is textbook existed. For instance, we have duplicated textbooks for blind with accessible materials. Sometimes you can find there is X, Y school in a different kabale. You can find all this material in X school, then Y school don't have material. But X school, but we duplicated depending on the data of education minister. Like if 1,000 children there, we duplicated 1,000 copies. But there is 100 children, then all 1,000 copies go to the 100 children school. Then the others. So we said delivery is inadequate in our country system of that. Even this is because of like understanding, because of commitment. The peoples are not also committed to distribute, to go. For instance, one day travel is there. Only 2 children with blind is there. So they are not committed to go there, to give there, rather than to just to drop in a nearby school these books and left out them. Adaptive materials depend on, most of the time, it depend on like donors. So because of this, it's not like a continue. Sometimes it happen, then next year, nothing. Because it mostly depend on the donors. Like for instance, this morning we see nice electronic system on a deaf to help the sign language. But for me, I was in a doubt when I was looking at it, because this should be presented for our government. And also no need to deliver. Just when you present, most of the time, the potential donors problem is just presenting and deliver for them. It's better to sign agreement. It's better to, they should have, you have to be very sure that before you deliver, they committed or not. Because if you help for this year, still they are waiting for next year. So I don't like you when you come here, because most of the time you are showing time. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted a better view.
So, so most of the time, this adaptive material should be carefully delivered for our country, because we are very happy. For instance, this morning when I look it, I even asked the guy that if it's possible, give me one with a soft copy of this, and I can bring to my country. I asked like this, but if he gave me, it doesn't work for me when I realize, because he said, I will send you actually. Thank you for that. I will send you by email. But the point is, if I took once, I look it, and maybe the commitment, I don't have a commitment, because if I pay something to get this one, there is a commitment. So I am very eager that to transfer to the others. And also the main point is government should take over it. But in our country, the situation is like more depending on that part. No, I finished already. The new time. This is the new agenda, demand side. From demand side, we see like from altitude, negative altitude of people towards disability continues, but this is encouraging improvement in awareness raising efforts and consequences. We say like this. There is still negative altitude in our country on disability issues, but there is some encouraging changes are there from the government, from the school community, as well as from the disability, the DPOs as well. Because previously DPOs are like organized like with 10 people, 20 people, 100 people, then just they are talking about themselves and blah, blah things. But now they are opening their eyes to talk about the other who not get services as like them. So there is eye-catching political goodwill on the part of government to support disability initiatives in contribution of media personnel. This is what we already discussed this morning also. The media personnel contribution is now very encouraging us on this regard. And also the decision makers of the funding partners started to show interest in including the issue of disability in their respective service development. This is also encouraging us, like because the funding agents, I have a more minutes, so I
2 minutes.
Yeah, because I finished with now with half minutes, so I have more minutes. The interest of teachers to address the special education needs of students with disability in inclusion class setting is still found as an encouraging part also. And also parents of children with disability started to send the children to school. These all things are encouraging us. From the cost point, some regional states took initiative to support this performance, like students with disabilities through something through providing monthly stipend. Like some states in our, we have more states, like around 10 states in Ethiopia. Some of we realize, like practical, we know that at least 2-3 of regions are started paying stipend monthly for this. This also me as encouraging. This is visible share of the. Also, government is have a visible share with the GQ program, with other funding organizations. They are also started like this kind of support. The final one with the final meaning is the contribution of the government is transcribing textbooks into Braille is considered as an exemplary additional cost. So I wanted to thank you to open your eyes and to looking me and to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm not going to open it for questions because we're running a bit late, right? So who would like to go next? Kenya. Okay, let's bring it on. Let's bring it on. How much time? Sorry?
Sorry, I wasn't here when we started, so I didn't know how much time to start calling.
We have 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Keep in mind that after this is the reception, so that's the incentive.
I'll be very fast. And they didn't ask me whether I wanted to be next. Okay, I'll go by the format of how we started. We had comprehensive discussions around all the topics, but we just picked a few comments that we'd want to share with the rest, while our comprehensive discussions will feed into our way forward. In teachers, in Kenya, we felt we are reasonably not doing bad. But we need to scale up, and because we don't have full coverage. And one of the things that came out very clearly in our teachers' preparation and everything is that currently the government is reviewing the curriculum of preparing teachers. And we believe the new curriculum will be guided by the new sector policy on special needs education. So we can see that in a few years' time, maybe would have implemented it fully. In terms of infrastructure, we had a very in-depth discussion, but we also felt that we are in the middle. We are not in either of the extremes, but we are also hopeful because the new sector education policy on persons with disabilities provide guidance on infrastructure. So we are hoping that from where we are, we'll be able to upscale on the infrastructure around our schools. One thing that came out very clear in the infrastructure is that our schools have multiple funding opportunities for infrastructure, but that is not coordinated and well harnessed. So there's need of working on that from the government side. Then on learning materials, when we look at our country, you find that there's a lot of emphasis on disabilities that are related to sensory impairments, for example, visually impaired students or learners who have hearing impairment, you will find in their settings they have supportive materials, they have adapted learning materials, whilst in other disabilities such as intellectual disabilities, there's almost nothing. But in that case, we've also found that the teachers are also very creative in the schools, and they've been able to use the locally available materials still to adapt them as learning materials for the learners. Then there's what Rolando brought in his presentation about the government giving 1 million tablets. So we're also looking at how can the tablets be used as learning materials for different types of disabilities. Then in the demand side, we had an extensive discussion in attitude, but what we felt is, again, we are not in either of the extremes. We are not doing very well, neither are we not doing very badly. But what we felt is like we still have that gap where we've not able to really measure whether we are making any difference in attitude change. Yes, we can measure the number of advocacy sessions, the number of sensitization workshops, but we've not been able to measure if those workshops produce any impact and if we transform anybody's attitude. And this cuts across from the teachers' administration, the families, and the community as well. Then in cost, as it is now, the Free Primary Education and the Basic Education Act, the government provides free primary education and subsidized secondary education. And for the child with, or the learner with disabilities, they get almost, actually double the funding. You will find the government will release funds for each learner, but again, for each learner who has disability, the government tops up actually double what they gave initially. But what there's a gap between implementation of that fund. So many times the fund doesn't go to the learner specifically, and that's where the problem is. So we are looking at maybe government being able to come up with proper implementation plans to follow up on that funding. Because if that funding was effectively utilized, our parents will not need to pay anything extra. But now they have to pay extra because the fund is not used the way it's supposed to be used. Then, yeah, I think that was the last one. Thank you.
Well done, well done. Very good. Yes, first one to reception, exactly. Okay, so who's next from the two remaining? Who wants to go? South Africa? Why not?
I want to do a fantastic presentation, but that will not be possible. No, it's going to take too much time. And people want to have drinks and food. Okay. Okay, you need to. Yeah, no, it would be fine for
10 minutes?
Yes. 7. Maybe just to give an overview quickly on the supply side around teachers, and I'm just going to give some of the highlights, and we have verified this also with our government colleague and some documents, is the integrated strategic planning framework for teacher development and education, or actually requires, as part of the pre-service training, that teachers should that there should be specialist qualification programs. It does not require that all teachers should be exposed to those programs, but that it should be available at the pre-service. Just some highlight on in-service training, screening, identification, and assessment and support. This CIAS, in 2017, nearly 30,000 teachers have been trained on that. But if you take into account there's a couple of 100,000 of teachers, it's not that much, but it's a start. And also the Basic Education Department received funding from the EU and is currently busy with a teaching and learning capacity development improvement program, in-service program on inclusion. On infrastructure, I just want to highlight something that Sandy has alluded to also yesterday, which is like the contradiction for inclusion. In 2002, there was 295 special schools in South Africa. 2015, there are 464, which is more than double. No, my math is nearly double, of which the majority is public schools. So it shows you the kind of the catch-22 situation in terms of that. Learning support materials. We have talked yesterday as well around the guidelines is being published about resourcing for inclusive education and also to make Braille more accessible. Currently, there is not many textbooks available in Braille. Yeah, I think I will stop with that in terms of the supply. If I can go to the demand side. I think many of the things we have talked about in the previous sessions, I'm not going to repeat much of that. I think one of the important things is that though there is some progress being made in terms of attitudes, a big thing in terms of it is the how. Still need to appreciate and act on it from teacher level to management level. Also, the Department of Basic Education acknowledged that inclusive education, especially at provincial department level, is restricted and fragmented and is embarking on a large-scale advocacy program, which we want to see happening. Inclusion policies, and there's the afterthought around that. The risk and awards, in addition to all of those that is already there, is the one thing that is, I think, has been coming forward. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible here, and now it's a tongue twister. That political decisions sometimes can be made, and has been, rumor has it, that to put children with disabilities in mainstream schools and then just to say the children should cope, the school should cope, and that is how we will ensure inclusion. This is not from the Department of Basic Education. That's from another department. So just to indicate that. And then I think the last one on cost, we have dealt with some of those areas, but the funding priorities continue to be in favor of special schools. And that is something that comes from the government. It's not necessarily something that we have made up, but acknowledge that. And just an interesting thing around that, that the cost, especially in the higher quintiles, for example, or in quintile 1, is often the fees that parents have to pay in ordinary schools is much, much higher than in special schools, because ordinary school subsidy for that group of income is less subsidized by government, where the specialized schools are more. So that is something to take into account. And also, I think I'm going to stop here because I've lost my place. So it's a very good sign that I need to stop.
Thank you very much, Andres. So, okay, good. So the Ghana team.
If anyone at this time, while I'm putting this up, wants to come up, I can. Sorry, it always does that, unfortunately.
Can I just remind you, there is a green form in your folders, and we would ask you to fill that out with your data, because this is what IAP is using to do its statistics. And as you know, statistics are important. So I would really ask you before the end of the day, perhaps during the cocktail or now.
Before the reception.
Right, before the reception, Tori, things, to fill that out. It's in your folders. It's the green form. So thank you very much.
Is this it?
Yeah, no,
Nope.
the other one.
That's me.
Demand and supply.
Demand and
Supply side.
got it. And go.
Okay, so we looked at both the supply side and the demand side. Okay, so for teachers, we try to do a very thorough evaluation, and we've been quite modest with where we think we are, even though, I mean, we had dissenting views. About teachers, we think that in terms of support, there are special education teachers in districts who are used as resource people, which I think is good. And currently we have 2 programs that are ongoing. One is NACOB and one is the Youth Employment Agency, who are also trying to provide additional teachers for, to support schools. We do have an inset, more or less an IE model manual, which have been produced, basically focus on inclusive pedagogy. There are sessions on IE policy, screening process, referral process for teachers, and what services are available aside classroom management. Then in terms of teacher capacity, we think that the teachers are responding to IE at different levels. We think some are very confident in diverse learning needs and are able to provide the needed support in the classroom. But some are also requiring, more support in terms of teaching and learning materials. But we think that it depends on the level of support that is given to various schools or districts. Mainstreaming IE have been mainly around pedagogy, how to use materials to stimulate teaching and learning processes. There is kind of our teacher training modules is built around this. Year 1 is built around observation, Year 2 lesson planning, and Year 3 practice competencies. We think that there is more coverage to make sure there's understanding, and we want to be more consistent. That's the teacher bit, but we think we are at reasonable level. In terms of infrastructure, we think that it's more or less beginning. There are some gains that have been made, but we think there's more coverage to be done. So in terms of practice, we think it's at initial steps at community levels. You could see some ramps being built, which are accessible toilets and some wash programs. In terms of new constructions that are being done for some schools, you see about 100 of these new schools have some accessible toilets, ramps, and things like that. We do have standards and guidelines, which is basically guiding, the way schools should be built in terms of doors, windows, in terms of ramps, gradients, and this is basically following the UDL principles. We think we need to work a bit more on our maintenance culture. There are no government schools transport system. However, we do know that most of the private schools operate some buses that takes children to school. Of course, this does not belong here. It belongs to the learning materials. So in terms of learning materials, we do have Braille materials that have been, for textbooks that are being done. There are Braille versions, but the challenge is to get every textbook in Braille. In terms of pre-tertiary curriculum, we are looking at appropriate TLMs for teachers. There are, some fragmented provisions of assistive devices, but generally it has been by NGOs and DPs. Ghana has ratified the Marrakesh Treaty, basically allowing any individual to copy any book, even though it has copyright. And so it's a very good thing for us. We are also trying to standardize sign language or sign language dictionary, and it is almost done, but not much has been done on audiovisual stuff. For the disability movement, we do have the District Assembly Common Fund, which provides some 3% component for persons with disability, and some of learners with disability rely on this fund for their learning materials. And then there's one module in initial teacher training that looks at how to use local resources, materials to teach concepts. On the demand side, about attitudes, we do have some young advocates, basically peer-to-peer, support being done. And when you go to the districts, you see this happening. There are some independent documentaries that have been done by TV stations or media men, and media people continue to invite us generally to talk about, inclusive education. But we think that we need to do a lot more media soiree. There is a need to focus more on district officials, who are basically responsible for putting up buildings and significant other things in districts. And we are looking at their general attitudes and infrastructure approaches. UNICEF is currently working with the Federation of Disability Organization to do more sensitization in churches and mosques. Before the launch of the IE policy, there were also some TV and radio campaigns. UNICEF is also using the C4D model to try to reach more communities. Of course, there are negative social cultural attitudes towards having children with disabilities. For some families, it's very hard for them to accept that their children have disabilities. And also we acknowledge that they have very poor family support or counseling system. In terms of costs, a lot of the costs, goes to special schools. We think that there are some infrastructure provisions, but this is limited. There are no provision of school transport assistive devices for children with disability. We think that special schools have no tuition. Special schools generally have no teaching fees. They do have free core textbooks, feeding program, free uniforms, free boarding, and hostels. Mainstream schools still have some hidden costs, sometimes around levies or exams fees. Not much on capitation grants are given to basic schools. And keeping children with severe disabilities, we think that it impacts on female education because it turns out that a lot of caregivers are usually females. In terms of risk and rewards, we think that there's a need for more research and evaluation on costs. Of course, UNICEF is planning this, so it's upcoming. So it's still at some initial or beginning stages. We think that, yes, some teachers, some peers of children with disabilities are showing positive attitudes towards persons with disability, and we think that this will give greater community inclusion. There has been some pilots on subnational level to see benefits of IE. We think that the time period for coverage so that everybody can enjoy IE is something that is a risk because some people are in waiting. There's a need for more infrastructure changes to allow IE to be, more enhanced. TLMs not adequate and adapted, and finally we do have safe school packs, which generally looks at bullying, positive behavior, and sexual harassment.
Okay, thank you very much, Vagana, for this. We can open it up, let's say 5 minutes, some questions. I actually have a first question. I'm interested in the sign language. In a lot of contexts, it's localized. So in a lot of contexts, they're just developing a lot of the signs. So there isn't actually an official sign language as such. So we're talking a lot about sign language. In the technology that Rosangela presented earlier. So I'm wondering, where is this going in these different country contexts as far as certification of sign language instructors is concerned, because we want to make sure that we get the quality up for these children in the classes. And if sign language is not up to that level, so how can we ensure that we provide that quality later on in the classroom? So what are some of the measures that are taken to ensure that certification of sign language instructors is being looked at in these different country contexts? So that's my question. Who else has a question? We can collect perhaps 2, 3. No? Anyway, yes, thank you.
I have a question related to your question too. That is, what are the partners working with ministries of education and the DPOs? In the case of sign language, for example, who is there to support? We know that the global community, the global deaf community is very active on helping countries to develop their own languages. It's a tough thing because many countries have many sign languages, and they not necessarily think that unifying is a good idea. But it would be important also, how do we start mapping who are these partners to support not only on sign language, but on other parts of inclusive education? I think the momentum is now, and there are a lot of resources around the world that could be capitalized as a
I'd like to ask for the countries that presented, if there are any experience or maybe some studies about the experiences of those children who don't have disabilities or their parents. There might be opportunities also to look at that as one of the impacts. What kind of social emotional skills perhaps it creates when we think of inclusive classrooms, or the students really having the experience of diversity from the beginning, and not really having that kind of perspective that they are the helpers of someone else, but rather how they actually experience the diversity and what kind of life skills and really competencies this brings for the kids in the future.
Would anyone like to address those comments that just happened? Or hello?
Just to say a bit on the sign language, Ghana as a country, I think with support from the US Peace Corps, work closely with the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service to adapt one particular sign language for the country. As we speak now, it's ready, waiting for approval from the leadership of the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service to be signed, and then we'll start rolling it out. Again, with the new curriculum, which is also being reviewed, we are looking at ways of adapting that sign language as one of the core medium of instructions for learners in the school for the deaf. And then let me also say a bit on the what values the kids are beginning to develop in terms of appreciating the diversity in the classroom. Initially, it was difficult. People were resistant. But in district where we've actually gone full scale with implementation, we've realized that now there is that acceptance and inclusion and support even at the peer-to-peer level, so that if a child is in a wheelchair, the other peer is ready and willing to support them to travel to and from school. And in the classroom, they are ready to sit next to them to support them with learning. During play and games time, they are also willing to play with them. So there is that whole acceptance and inclusion and helping them to build that core values, which is helping them in the community.
Just to say, in terms of South Africa, that sign language, South African Sign Language is an official language of learning and teaching. And the accreditation from sign language translators comes from at university level. It is an official accreditation. We actually just last year had our first official sign language matriculants. So it's
Okay, I'll respond to the questions, but I think I'll also invite my colleagues to give their additions. In Kenya, the Kenyan Sign Language is an official national language recognized by the Constitution. So we have 3 national languages, English, Swahili, and Kenyan Sign Language. And of course, the accreditation is through institutions that have been certified and accredited by the government. When we talk about experience or studies of children with or without disabilities, I'll give an example of a model we use at Special Olympics Kenya. We work in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, and we implement what we call unified sports, which is a model which brings children with intellectual disabilities and those without to play together, not against each other. And from our experiences, we've seen it's a very quick way of changing the attitudes of those without. They're able to understand their peers with intellectual disabilities. They're also able to see that they are able to do other things, even if they are not able to do very well in academics. And actually this year, I'm intending to conduct a study on the same, because we've seen a lot of positive impact, but it's not documented. So I'm planning to do that. Yeah, so I'll welcome my colleagues if they want to add something.
Got our last edition with time, and then
thank you. I think I'll add to the voice of Susan from Kenya. Kenya, we are also, as she has correctly said, we have recognized sign language as one of the key languages. We have also within some training institutions mounted courses, so that those who are coming to train as teachers and even the public servants who train now to work in government are also being taken through sign language. We have also made it in Kenya every year. The minister signs a performance contract with the president on what deliverables he or she will deliver within the year. One of the key deliverables in that performance contract is that disability mainstreaming within the workplace will be one of the things. And one of the key targets is there will be a sign language, a minimum of 1 every year in that organization employed. And all those employees that will be taken in within the year, recruited, a minimum of 5% must be people with a disability. And therefore, this is also promoting and motivating those who are in school that there is an opportunity within government that you can actually get a job easily now, even if you are with a person with a disability. So those are the kind of initiatives we are taking, and sign language is taken very highly because of the service to the public, because we sign what we call the Public Service Charter. And that commitment is made there, that there is nobody who will be turned away because you cannot speak or you have a disability. Thank you.
all right. Thank you so much.
Ethiopia wanted to respond as well, right? Okay.
Thank you. I love to hear that Kenyans and South Africa adopted as a national language, sign language, but in Ethiopia, not yet. Not yet recognized as a national language, but still we are pushing. From the side of providing training, DPOs are also working on it, and also at Addis University are trying to train sign language as a communication language, just not as a national language for persons who engage in this area. But we are still trying to push out. But for us, it's very important that to hear from Kenyans like that, from our sister country, like these kind of things adapted it, and as a national language.
Yeah, I was asking that question because I was taking a sign language course in French-speaking Belgium, And I was trying to get into the logic of it, given that it's a different way of expressing yourself. And when I talked to people there, they were telling me that they would not be able to understand the sign language that they would use in Flemish Belgium, which I was quite amazed about. So I'm wondering, in the kind of context that we're talking here about, let's say Kenya and Ethiopia, with already the different languages within the country, I'm wondering how you can come up with a national sign language, given that a country like Belgium, which is very small, has these issues to deal with. So I just wanted to put that out there. Anyhow, I think we are ready to hit the cocktail bar. And so thank you very much, everybody. I think it was a very productive day, very interesting, lots of enriching discussions. So let's go and enjoy a drink.
Yes, and thank you.